All right, everybody. Up next for our next company, we're going to have Longman Suntech Energy.
Thank you. Okay, firstly, like a big thank you to the Reflective and the Rchain team. For having us here. So, to start with, we are Longman Suntech Energy, and we sell green power to businesses at a very competitive prices. Now, how do we do that? To start with, we have a team which has got a great mix of engineering and financing talent. We have 4 engineers from India's one of the most premier engineering institutes, and we got a PhD in finance from Wharton who has traveled with me today to Seattle. Now, what's the problem that we are solving and what's wrong with the power sector? To start with generation. Talking of generation, much of the power which is generated around the world is done using fossil fuel, which means a high carbon footprint. Now, it is very difficult to find land to build these huge power plants, which means it leads to the problem of power shortage in a much larger part of the developing world. Now, whatever gets generated needs to be transmitted on the transmission lines, which are not only expensive to build, but as much as 30% of the power gets lost in these transmission lines in much part of the world. Now, the last bit is distribution. Now, after all this, when power reaches a socket, it is subject to a very complex set of regulations, which they claim is customer friendly, but power consumers all around the world have been facing one big problem, that is the rising cost of electricity. Now, is that all? Unfortunately, no, because there is this big trouble of financing all this power generation, transmission, and distribution capacity, for which you have to talk to a centralized ecosystem of large financial institutions, which leads to the big problem of lack of access to capital and high cost of whatever capital you manage to get. So what's the solution? Now, the solution is rooftop solar power plants. Now, we have built some very cool power plants, including one of India's largest rooftop solar power plant for a healthcare facility. But then how does it help? To start with, it's got zero carbon footprint. Secondly, these are offered at a zero down business model to the power consumers, which means they don't have to think again, or think twice before having us there. These power plants don't need any land to be built, which almost solves most of the problem as far as the power generation is concerned. Rooftop solar power plants, by definition, don't need any transmission lines. And our transmission loss, well, if you can call it a loss, is less than 0.5% because all the power needs to travel is from the rooftop down to the building. From the distribution part, we are actually saving ourselves from much of the regulatory trouble because we are generating power at the very premise where it is consumed. But still, we are subject to some of the problems, such as the net metering regulations and all. So that last part of the cookie, that is, with respect to distribution, is still not completely solved. But one big problem still remains, how to finance all this. So what we thought about is, if we can integrate all these rooftop solar power plants in limited geographies under what is called a microgrid configuration, that would really be great. But then people need to transfer power and settle payments. People need to have a record of all the power that is generated and consumed. We believe a fast and a reliable blockchain is the network on which these microgrids can exist. So that's what we've been doing for the last year and a half, figuring out the configuration for a decentralized distributed solar microgrid, because we believe it can give a trustless record of whatever power is generated and consumed. Above all, the community within these microgrids will be able to determine the pricing mechanism and not some centralized authority which you never see in your life. We believe it will be highly scalable, there will be a high level of redundancy, very low transmission losses, because still we are talking of microgrids, not large national grids wherein power is transmitted over long distances. And we believe we have also figured out a way to solve the decentralized financing problem with the token sale. So this is what we're going to do. We have planned to do an ICO. We are already 5 months into the planning for it. Whatever we raise in an ICO, we will leverage using the conventional financial institutions that we've been talking all along. If they give us a good deal on that, we build rooftop solar power plants using all this money. when these guys pay us back, that is the power consumers pay us back, we pay back to the financial institutions. I mean, I'm sorry, there was a back here, I don't know, somebody got lost somewhere. So, I mean, yeah, so we actually will pay back to these guys. So we pay back to the financial institutions whatever we owe to the institutions. We'll tokenize the money and we'll send it back to the investor. But that's just the beginning of it. Eventually, the power consumers will have gained enough confidence in our tokens. The token value would have stabilized, at which point in time we will allow our power consumers to pay us in the tokens. Apart from that, we will allow these power consumers within the limited geography of a microgrid to transact power using a token, at which time our token from a security token will have become a security plus a utility token, or what is better known as a hybrid token. At that point in time, we believe we will be having enough opportunity to deleverage from the conventional financial institution ecosystem. Now, how big is that market? According to the CIA World Factbook, there's going to be a $5 trillion market just to build all this power generation capacity. I'm just talking of rooftop solar, which will generate close to 0.9 trillion worth of electricity on an annual basis. Now, I will kind of jump first to here. Now, how does that help the Rchain community? We are basically talking of inducing high-level efficiency to the power network. Also, we are talking of replacing the existing grid systems around the world, which means an exponential rise in the blockchain transactions, which can happen on the blockchain that we choose to use. From a technology perspective, we'll be decentralizing the upstream, the midstream, and the downstream of the power sector. There are many other sectors which are structured around this way. What we do can be a template for the Rchain community and for all those who are planning to join the Rchain community. And last but not the least, an investment plus a technology partnership with us just shows the strong commitment of the Rchain and the Rchain communities towards green and a sustainable economy. I'll get back to our competitors. We have competitors in terms of utility scale solar power developers, conventional power distributors, fossil fuel developers. Now, what is interesting to note is some of these will actually end up as collaborators because they will have no other option but to come on our microgrid and let their solar power plants transact power for their power consumers. Our ask for doing all this is $2.5 million, out of which we plan to spend like $33,000 for the microgrid blockchain development, $65,000 for ICO management, and $2.4 million for the launch of the ICO. Last but not the least, why we believe Rchain is great for us. We want a team which is technology-focused, community-building focused. We want a blockchain which is like really fast, which is scalable, and above all, we really love the fact that it can exist in like a separated parallel blockchains can exist because that is what we need to run hundreds of microgrids around the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Really appreciate it. Can you talk a little bit about what you've done so far to prove this out in terms of partners and equipment and people testing it? I'm curious what your early stage proving ground looks like.
Okay, so we have $1 million worth of installations already on the ground. We started off in India, we raised capital in India. Then we have raised capital in the US, and with US money, we have built more capacity out there. So there is $1 million worth of these rooftop solar power plants which we have built and are operating and are paying back to the investors. So we have an operational model on the ground, but then now the next feature is to integrate them onto what's called a microgrid, and we need a network to do that. So that's the next stage in our revolution. A very short question as well, an answer to that as well is, we have a ready pipeline of $75 million. Because what we have done is we have contracted with the likes of the Decathlon Sports from France or the Accor Hotels from France, to do their showrooms and hotels. So we have done one installations for, some of the locations, and they want us to do all their locations, around the geographies which we are in discussion with. So we have a ready pipeline of 75 million, which means the moment we do an ICO, we can just directly pump all that money into the installation for which we have already contracted.
Thank you, Sajid, for the presentation. This is certainly a problem worth solving. One of the pillars of a wonderful future is a sustainable planet. From the perspective of a founding team, Can you talk about why you and your team would be willing to invest the next several years of your life, if not more, to solving this specific problem?
Okay. Yeah, firstly, I mean, we are engineering graduates, as I just mentioned, the start from one of the premier engineering institutes. Then we did our MBAs. Then we got a great finance guys on board with us. Now, technically, we thought that, the whole power sector is basically an engineering plus a financial problem. There has to be efficiencies brought in from a technological perspective, and there has to be financial solutions brought about from a business model perspective. So, I mean, technically, we all were doing, different kind of stuff all around the world. I personally was a consultant out there in London, but we all grouped back and we thought that, if we are that good, we should definitely be solving this such a big problem, because ultimately we are engineers plus financial experts. And that's, and we have dedicated already 5 years of our life to it. We have reached, as I said, $1 million worth of installations, 75 million worth of pipeline, and we believe, we have a great length to go ahead.
Yeah, thanks again for the presentation. It's wonderful to see people focus on these kinds of problems. I do have a question, which is how do you tackle the problem of tying the actual power transmission to the token, right? So there has to be some kind of monitor on power transmission, and how do you secure that relative to the token?
Okay, we already have IoT devices in the place, which is attached to all these power plants. Which, if you let me, I can actually log into any of a power plant and can show how much power got generated at what part of the day. Now, the idea is, but all those networks are not safe enough to do the transactions happen. So we need a network when all this information can be keyed in, it can remain safe, and there has to be a pricing and a market mechanism wherein the community decides that, nobody will sell power like about 10 cents. Or maybe the community decides we don't have an upper cap. So, so we have a network which takes in information from all these power plants as of today. And we actually live display it to all our investors sitting in the US, in India, and we actually have started doing that in Japan as well. So we are live streaming all this information, but we are not using it for transactions as of now. So all that information put into like a very clever blockchain kind of a network and allow transaction using the tokens that we have raised. That's where we are progressing currently.
So that wasn't, thank you for that. It's a great background information. It doesn't quite answer my question. So, so essentially you've got an oracle, which is your network, and you have some blockchain network, which is managing the tokenization of the use of the power.
Right.
Okay. But how do we know that the oracle is telling the truth? How do we know how the information that comes in, what secures that information relative to the tokenization record? Do you understand?
Okay.
Because someone could come along and potentially hack some of the devices or hack the network. So how is that secured relative to the tokenization record? It's a problem every oracle faces, right? Every oracle that gets data onto the chain, you're going to have to trust the oracle.
Oh, right. So, so the IoT devices that we have developed, which actually records this information and sends it on the system, it is developed in tandem with some of the largest solar inverter manufacturers around the world. For example, SMA from Germany, or which is like Delta Power, from Taiwan. So, these are the guys who have like gigawatt worth of solar inverter technology, which is out there in the market. They've been doing this for more than 3 decades. So we told them that, we want to collect so-and-so information. They open up their ports. So we are working with them in order to collect the information. And we believe, that's like a very credit, because we are talking of people who have been in businesses managing huge, large power plants for more than 3 decades around. So we believe their interfaces will be smart and clever enough. Then we have an internal team which is been working on using those ports and using those information to bring onto the platform that we ourselves have developed.
So that feels like it's part of the solution. Have you thought about leveraging social verification, right? So if you get several actors all reporting the same information or commensurate information about what they're seeing relative to power usage, then you get some kind of social verification. If everyone has to trust the devices, then anyone can come along and hack the devices. Or a manufacturer can go, well, we'll give you most of the information. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I think that's a great idea, because already what we're doing is these guys are actually monthly on a billing basis. So what they actually do is they have their own localized meter sitting at their location, and they can read whether, how much power they are getting, which means we send a bill using our device, but they can physically check whatever they are getting. So so based on what you just said, so when a day-to-day transaction can happen, these people can be given power to verify. So basically we have power consumer or user confirmed interactions which is going on. And clearly, that's a great idea which we can actually layer upon what we have already thought about. Sure.
So you mentioned these are rooftop solar power plants. How's that different than just regular solar panels? And do you have storage backup of all that extra energy that's generated? And then how does that work with the microgrid? Is that the people that are reliant on that, are they completely off the grid, or how does that interact with the regular grid?
To start with, none of these are actually off-grid. So so the off-grid systems we only sell as a direct sale model. So we take the money and we sell it to the consumer. So all these are actually on-grid systems, which means if you have extra power, it goes back to the grid, using a technology called net metering. So we send it back to the grid. And in many geographies, that's like really helpful to the grid as well, because our power plant generate extra power during the day when the demand is like really high. So we send all that power to the distribution company when they need the most, and then when the power like really costs them really high in the power exchange. And in the night when the power is like cheap, they actually send it back to our systems or to our power consumers. So that's what's really happening. And and even within microgrid setup, that is what is going to happen. So so power is going to go through the system as well as come into the system using the net metering technology to start with. We are also looking very keenly into battery technology as well as the storage technology, but as of now, it is not making economic sense, because our major selling point is that our electricity is cheaper than the grid, and that is how it's going to be for the next 25 years. Generally, if you try selling a power plant, it takes 6 to 7 months to convince a guy. For us, it takes less than a day. We just tell them, you know what, you just sign on the paper, we build the power plant, you have an assured energy at a fixed price for the next 25 years, which is cheaper even today. So that can't happen as of now with storage, but we are very confident that maybe we are just 5 or 6 years down the curve, wherein we can have our own storage, which can be part of the microgrid itself, so that our reliance on the existing grid keeps coming down and down.
Right, so with net metering, when you're pushing that power out back to the power grid, how does that get compensated back to the microgrid for all the people that are investing in that? Because if you have a home system and the net meter has that going back to the power supply, you get that money back for that. So how does that work with the microgrid situation?
Right. So guys, in the microgrid, basically what is happening is, these meters as of today reads plus and minus. So if you send it back, it reads minus. When you take it from the grid, it reads plus. So in microgrid, all that is going to happen is, so the whole thing will change to export and import, to be very fair. So so these devices, so these IoT devices, which are tied to the very net meters, will read how much got how much got exported and how much got imported. So so technically we will have a value of all the power which got exported from various different sources, and how much everybody imported from the system. And so what you have to do is the usage of all plus the import plus the export plus the losses will be will eventually lead to zero. So so we eventually know how much was exported by whom and at what time, and each consumer can decide at what price point they are ready to export. So you can say that, you know what, I don't need my power to get exported if the price is less than 7 cents. Now he can decide, I don't want power to be imported into my house if it is more than 6 cents, which means that transaction won't happen and your power will be just burned down to the ground. But next time you're clever enough and you say, you know what, last time nobody bought my power, so I'll bring that to 6 cents. He will eventually, so what will happen is, he won't even know what has really happened. Since your supply constraint has met his demand constraint, it just travels and the transaction really happens.
All right, we have time for one really quick question from the audience. Anybody? All right. There you go.
Hey, Robert Hicks, CED. I noticed you mentioned that some of the larger contractors, they open up ports to their network for you guys to run some testing. Is that correct?
Yeah, I said some of the large inverter manufacturers.
What do they do regarding security?
Okay, I mean, right, okay. I mean, that's like a long, winding question. I probably won't, or probably I'll take it offline separately. Okay. But yes, what they've been doing is, I mean, all this while, I mean, to cut it short, they've been trying on their own to, bring into a microgrid kind of solution, but that's not what has happened as of now. But but what they are doing is, they have protocols in place so that, like externally you can't feed in the network. And most importantly, they have a way to actually cross-check it with the physical meter. So which means if there is a difference in the reading which the physical meter shows, somebody can actually go and report it. Now, which actually means as of today, I will have to send somebody to see what is the difference, which is very similar to what actually Greg said, that there is a safe and secure environment, but at the same time, if somebody sees that there is some trouble, they can actually let the network provider, which is us, know that there is a difference. But as of now, somebody has to physically go and check what the difference is.
All right, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you so
Appreciate
much.
that.
Thank you.